Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to episode number 107 of the Primetime Rundown. Our show is presented to you by Black Cats NYC alongside Mike Szabo. Our good friend Ian Schraier is on assignment tonight. Joey Jarzynka on hand with you. We've got a real good one tonight, Mike. We've got someone coming in from Kansas City, actually, and it's Arrowhead Pride's very own Nick Schwert, who's a part of SB Nation's Kansas City Chiefs website. He'll be with us in about 15 minutes here to break down the Kansas City side of things for the upcoming Super Bowl. So, of course, before we get into everything else, our show is presented to you by Black Cats NYC. Be sure to download their newest hit solo, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us, on all of the music platforms where you could find your music: Apple Podcast, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube Music, Pandora, Sirius XM satellite radio as well, too. You could find Nothing's Gonna Stop Us. Black Cats NYC. You can take a peek at their website, also blackcatsnyc.com. Mike, good to see you, sir. How are things on your side on this brisk winter night?
Yeah, brisk is an understatement. It's been a while. It felt like it's been a while since we've been on the show, and a real good cure. This is a real good dose of medicine for the 11-degree weather that we have outside, and winter just deciding to rear its ugly head for the next 48 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you this much, ladies and gentlemen, it is a fantastic night for all things podcasting, all things football, all things Major League Baseball as well as hockey too. And of course, we'll be discussing St. John's and Xavier too. But of course, we'll be getting started with Tom Brady. He retires yet again. We'll also be talking about some of the coaching hires as well and some of the rumors that are going around the NFL too. Just a week before the Super Bowl, too, and a few days before media week starts. And, of course, there's some Major League Baseball news regarding the New York Yankees. We'll be discussing that. And, of course, in the National Hockey League, we are just 29 days away from the trade deadline. So there's a lot of rumors there, too. And, of course, we will be concluding off with our St. John segment. So, Mike, let's get things started just before our guest comes in, Nick Schwert. We spoke about Tom Brady before he retired yet again. And saying it's, quote, it's for good this time. He thanks his previous wives, Gisele Bundchen and Bridget Moynihan as well. And pretty much everyone, he thanked a whole bunch of them. And that was something that he did not do the first time around.
Yeah, I mean, this is an announcement that felt more, I don't want to say genuine, but it happened so fast last year where he retired and then couple weeks later, he came back. This just seemed very spur of the moment. Like he said on his video, this time I'd just rather press record and talk to you guys. And, it looks like this is it for him. And listen, he's quite up there in age. He's pretty much done everything there is to do in the sport of football. You can't blame him. And, I mean, listen, we said it a lot last year in the couple weeks window that we had before he decided to come back. He's the GOAT of the NFL. He's done everything, accomplished everything, winning 7 Super Bowls, more than an entire organization has in their history. Like the accolades we can read off till tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Of how fantastic he has been, his ranks and whatnot amongst all the greats. It's just an unbelievable career he's had, unbelievable competitive drive. You have to always respect that. And of course, I always loved the 2 Super Bowls that Eli Manning did win over him. That was always our favorite moments.
Well, your favorite moments. My favorite moment was Nick Foles beating him. So that was there were obviously only 2 quarterbacks that could take him down in the Super Bowl era.
Should have been 3 if it were not for Pete Carroll's dumb decisions.
Exactly. It could have been 3. But it's only 2, and it's Nick Foles and Eli Manning are the only 2 that have taken down the great one in the Super Bowl in the Super Bowl. So, obviously, Mike, there's so much chatter too from Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots. Will he retire a Patriot? Will he sign that one-day contract? And, I personally believe that he should. I really do believe that he should do so. He gave all of, however many years, I think it was almost 15, 18 years, give or take, his heart, blood, sweat, and tears to the entire city of Boston and the New England area. But again, we know about the tumultuous ending to his tenure there, where there was a lot of rumors that it might have been a little bit of Bill Belichick's doing. It might have been a little bit above him, but it seems as if that whatever has gone on in the past has, I would say, has gone to bed for the time being. And what we have seen from this New England Patriots era, the new one rather, I think that it's the right time to bring him home, sign that 1-day contract, and he should be retired as a Patriot. I think that um, for him to, and again, not he would be retired a buck, if you will, whatever. But it wouldn't be right if he didn't do that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a cherry on top. He's basically, in the 20 years that he was with the Patriots. I mean, he's made that franchise what it is right now. They had, I'm sorry to say, they had zero history before Brady came in and whatnot,
It's the truth.
and
It's the truth.
what he accomplished, him and Belichick, the whole crew there in 20 years, it's absolutely unheard of. The 6 titles, the all the fantastic years and whatnot. Um, I think he definitely should. We spoke about it earlier this week when we were talking off camera. That why not the Patriots? Go sign him 1-day contract. He retires as a Patriot. Like this whole generation, we've grown up watching Tom Brady, and he's been more synonymous as a New England Patriot for better or for worse, regardless of whether you liked him or disliked him. We've always thought of him as a Patriot more than we'll ever think of him as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, even though he won a Super Bowl there too. So why not? I think, too, for Robert Kraft, it'll be a nice PR thing. You do 1-day contract, bring the GOAT home. He retires a Patriot and celebrate his fantastic career.
Now the question though is that does Tom Brady want to retire a Patriot is the question, because we don't know about some of that unfinished business or maybe some of the issues that had transpired during the end. And no one really knows. No one really knows what the deal was. No one, and as I said just a few moments ago, no one knows if it was from Bill Belichick. No one knows if it was his doing. No one knows if it was higher up. We have no idea.
Yeah, but he's not unless like he does what he did last year again and changes his mind. He's not going back there. It's 1 day, like
Yeah.
I don't see any huge pitfall to it at this point. I think really, are we going to hold grudges? He's done everything that he can in his career. He's the GOAT. We were going to hold grudges over that. Sure, the ending was messy and all, but there were a lot of fantastic years and whatnot. I
Yeah.
think it would just be right. I don't think it's a major thing, but it would kind of be a cool little thing. I'm sure it will be huge for that Massachusetts area and the people of Boston.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then also too, we know about how last year
Mhm.
Adam Schefter was the one to pretty much report that and break that news. And a lot of people got on to Adam Schefter's rear end and they were not too happy with the fact that he broke that news. And then he wasn't too happy either. Tom Brady was not too happy with that it got out. And here he exactly, you saw in the beginning of the video too. He's like, well, all right, I'm just going to hit record here. And, you know, he
Yeah.
was by himself. No one knew a single thing. No one knew. He didn't say a word to anybody. Nobody had a clue.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, the media wasn't too happy about it. But again, it was tough. It was tough for him to do that. But I think it was crucial that he said thank you to everybody. He
Mhm.
said thank you to his 2 ex-wives too. You didn't hear that in the first one. You only saw just the written note. So this is definitely, in my opinion, that this is it for him. And our childhood is officially over. Your childhood, Mike, is just beginning. So, so your baby years, I guess, are done. But my childhood years are officially done now with Peyton Manning, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger. The list goes on. It's now in
Listen,
the rear.
you look at the greater picture of football too. He was the last of what is the dying breed in the pure pocket passer. He held on the longest, around for 23 years in the NFL. and played at such a high level almost pretty much until the end. Now all those quarterbacks that you mentioned, along with Brady, those kind of style of quarterbacks are just not the way quarterbacks are molded nowadays in the
Yeah.
NFL. So I think there's something to appreciate with that as well. It's an end of an era kind of
Oh,
thing
yeah.
with
And he
the style of
holds
quarterback.
and yeah, exactly right. And Mike, also, he holds almost every single record as a for the position of quarterback, which again, there's a lot of records in there that may never be broken ever.
Mhm.
So we'll see how long those records can stay under his name, which I expect for a lot of our lifetime. Let's go to one more topic here because we still have another few minutes um, before our guest comes on, Nick Schwert. And we don't want to obviously talk too much about the Super Bowl because we also have next week too. And since we will be back on the air with you next week, we want to ensure that we have enough conversation to talk about with regarding the Super Bowl. And we want to keep on going here with other football news. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So, Mike, let's continue. Houston, the Texans, they hired former San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans as their head coach to a 6-year deal. And this is someone that was drafted in 2006 by the Houston Texans. And he's only one of 4 players who became a head coach for a team that drafted him almost I think 15 years later. And from what we've seen from DeMeco Ryans as not only a player in Houston, which again you were way too young, but then with the Philadelphia Eagles afterward, I knew that. I loved him as a player. I remember watching him growing up with him, Whitney Merciless, those guys in the middle, and a part of that front seven that just before he was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, he was a force to be reckoned with. And you see it from the coaching standpoint too. He's got everyone disciplined very well. And I think that this is a home run hire, especially to bring one of their own home. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think 6 years is always questionable to a guy who hasn't head coached yet, to commit for that long. But yeah, I think it's feel good in the sense that the D'Amico Ryans, like you said, he was drafted by Houston, and I don't want to say it's a good hire just yet. There's a lot to gauge on it, but he comes along with some great experience from San Francisco, the defensive guy and whatnot. He has a heck of a job ahead of him with Houston that has really struggled the last few years, to say the least.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from what we have seen in terms of the constant struggling and very simple, the 4 head coaches in 4 years is something that a lot of folks they kind of shy away from because they don't want to be a one and done type coach. It's not a good look. And obviously because Houston has been in such a rut the last few years, and Mike, we spoke back in the summer with Steph Stradley about that. We simply it's such a dysfunctional organization that now DeMeco Ryans calls a dream job. He's going back home. He's going where it all began. And something in his press conference too, when he had the aforementioned Merciless, he had Cushing with him. He also had Andre Johnson with him too. And with everything going right in terms of they got a couple of draft picks, they have about 45 or $40 million in cap space. They got to start from the ground up. And I think that this is something that, he turned down the Denver job too. Turned down that Denver job and said, "Nah, I'm okay." I don't know. Again, the guy wants to start from the bottom and work his way up, and I give him a lot of credit.
Mhm, definitely.
So, with that being said, our guest is officially here, and ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome in Nick Schwert. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Arrowhead Pride's very own SB Nation's Kansas City Chiefs website, Nick Schwert. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. How are things with you out in Kansas City?
Things are great here, man. It's a good time to be a Chiefs fan. So the city is buzzing. I appreciate you guys having me on tonight.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. So, obviously it's been a whirlwind over here. It's awfully close here in New York where we're dealing with the Empire State Building lighting up in green at times, and with Mike over there being a Giants fan, me being an Eagles fan, it's time to be alive right now. But I'm glad you're with us here to talk some Chiefs. And I think the first thing that we got to start off with, obviously, since I brought up that I am an Eagles fan, the big thing obviously is no pun intended big. But Andy Reid is back in the Super Bowl and facing his former team. And I know there's so many different storylines about how he did not retain the now Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni when he was fired from, or when he was let go from the Eagles back in 2012. And subsequently he went to San Diego after. But there's so many different storylines, and I think we'll start off with that one with Andy Reid. What have you heard out there? And he obviously he says he's willing to ready to face them and whatnot, but he's got a lot of love for the city. What have you seen?
Andy's an interesting cat. He doesn't give much away. You listen to him talk, and we listen to him talk every week, right? We're airing his I work for 610 Sports Radio in town as well, so we're airing his press conferences every week, and you don't really expect to get much from him. He doesn't give much away schematically. He doesn't give much away in terms of injuries, but he takes it to a new extreme whenever you try to pry into his emotions, whenever you try to figure out, hey, how you feeling about this? What are the memories going to be when you go up against your former team? Since he's been the Chiefs head coach, he has faced the Eagles 3 times, and I think the farther away you get from it, right? He spent 14 seasons in Philadelphia, but the farther away that you get from it, it maybe lessens the emotions that go into it. And the more you play that team, it lessens the emotions that you may feel. I know that Andy is going to probably, or has already spent time thinking about what it's going to be like to go up against an organization that he spent so much time with. But this guy is a creature of habit. I mean, he sleeps 2 hours a night. He's up at 4 a.m. All he thinks about is football. I really believe that. Like, I think there's a human being in there. Like, his players love him. And he knows how to push those right buttons. He knows how to be critical and then come back and put his arm around you. But there's a human side, but he just doesn't let it out. So I don't know what he's feeling. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm sure he's feeling something about it, but what have I seen? Absolutely nothing. And I don't expect that to change. He's not the type of guy who's going to sit there for 2 or 3 minutes and just sort of, speak poetically about memories in his life.
Yeah, that's true. And especially too, he also has a few players that he drafted on the Eagles roster. Currently, he's got Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, and why did I just draw a blank here?
Jason Kelce.
Yeah, exactly. And Jason Kelce too. Exactly. So, those are really the big 3 that are the oldest guys on the team, and, that he drafted. So Mike, take it away. We'll switch it up.
Yeah, Nick, thanks so much once again for coming on with us. And we were talking about watching that game on Sunday. I think, the legend of Mahomes continues to grow even more. That, the performance that he pulled, basically just being on one leg. I think the conversation always was on the broadcast that if it were probably a regular season game, he probably would have taken that game off. They would have, he would have been out of the game and whatnot. But this is obviously was the AFC Championship and whatnot, and the performance he was able to pull off. And still, like as Joey and I were saying, just holding your breath every time he was going to be tackled or whatnot. And then that final run to set up the game-winning field goal. Just continues to add to this fantastic legend. And I mean, where does it go if he captures another Super Bowl title?
Man, well, that moment in general, like that game specifically, will be his flu game, will be his bloody sock game, right? It only matters if you win the title. If you lose to Philadelphia in the Super Bowl, it will be a blip. Kind of like last year. I don't know if you guys remember this not being in Kansas City, but when they beat the Bills in that divisional round game, everybody in Kansas City was printing those Grim Reaper t-shirts because Andy Reid said after the game, hey, well, I told him when things get grim, be the Grim Reaper. People were printing the shirts, making signs at the game. Then they lost to the Bengals the next week. Guess what? Nobody calls Patrick Mahomes anymore. The Grim Reaper, the legend of that 13-second drive feels kind of hollow knowing you didn't even go to the Super Bowl last year, let alone win it. So I think that was an amazing performance. And I think you put it pretty astutely, Mike. It's not that he is a legend. It's almost his story is that of legends, right? He just keeps doing these things that don't make any sense, that make other guys who play the game sort of like I was listening to Ray Lewis talk about it on Inside the NFL, and he said, I don't get it. I've had that ankle injury. You're not supposed to be able to do some of the things that he can do. And that's a testament to his training process. You know, his trainer, Bobby Stroop, who he works with every offseason and during the season, he said, like, it may sound crazy, but that's the type of stuff that Patrick Mahomes works on. He works on joint and ligament flexibility to be able to withstand the sorts of injuries that can sideline guys for, 2+ months. And Patrick said after the game, I thought that my straight line speed would be okay. It was the change of direction. I didn't know how I was going to be able to move from side to side. Looked to be moving all right on that run that set up the eventual game winner. So that's going to be a moment that everybody remembers if the Chiefs can take care of business against Philadelphia.
We brought up obviously earlier with Jason Kelce, but now you look on the other side with Travis Kelce, and the first ever brother pairing going head to head in the Super Bowl era is truly amazing. And now it's Super Bowl 57, and you say to yourself, in 57 years, it really has not been a brother pairing that have gone against each other. I found that wild, and of course it's happening with the Kelce brothers. Amazing stuff to see. From what you've gotten to see with these two clowns, if you will, you see Travis and you see what Jason has done here. Both eventual Hall of Famers, no doubt, but I don't want to call it their antics, but they just seem like they're so much fun. Obviously Jason coming up with him in the offensive line, coming up with the Christmas album, and Travis doing a whole bunch of stuff in Kansas City, I would assume. How cool is that in the vibe that you've seen from the Travis side of things out in Kansas City?
I mean, he got emotional after the game or when Harrison Butker kicked the game winner and the Chiefs ended up winning. You saw him getting emotional on the field as one of his position coaches kind of grabbed him and said, let's go play your brother in the Super Bowl. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have been following along the New Heights podcast between Travis and Jason. It's so entertaining. I mean, these guys seem like normal dudes. They just seem like dudes, just brothers. And it's astounding that now all of a sudden they're not just on opposing teams playing in the Super Bowl, because that's impressive enough, right? Let alone the fact that two brothers just playing in the NFL, right? We think it's a cool with the McCourty twins, right?
Right.
That the Gronkowski brothers, the Watt brothers, but to play in the NFL and to be the two best players at your individual position, and now you're facing off against one another in the Super Bowl.
Right.
It's astonishing. It really is. It's a cool story, and I'm sure they're going to get tired of hearing about it, and I'm sure they're going to get tired of being asked about it. And I'm sure, it's probably going to be one of the things you can bet on with all the prop bets that they have for the Super Bowl. There will be a prop bet of how many times will they mention the Kelce brothers being the first brothers to face off in the Super Bowl, and there will be a prop bet about how many times they show Donna Kelce, their mother, in a suite.
Yeah, wearing the Travis Kelce jersey in the middle, and then on the shoulders you got the green.
It's cool. I mean, they're obviously not facing off against one another, right? They're both offensive players, but it's a cool story. I love it.
Yeah, that's really amazing to see. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, going back to the Chiefs offense side of things, I think the last time when we saw them go into the Super Bowl, you had Damian Williams be this the great running back. He had a solid rushing attack and whatnot. And now all of a sudden, almost seemingly out of nowhere, you have Isaiah Pacheco, who's been, fantastic, particularly in that game against Jacksonville. But I think he has really established himself such a tough runner, and yet another dimension to this Chiefs offense than the legendary air raid attack and whatnot. What have you seen from him and his continued development?
This was a guy people were buzzing about back in training camp, but at the time he was a 7th round pick, and we know how it goes. 7th round picks, you're lucky to make the roster. but people started talking about him. This happens every year. There's always some rookie that everyone's like, hey, watch out for this guy. He's turning heads at OTAs. He's turning heads at training camp. The coaches really like him. We say, okay, we'll see about that. But then Clyde, he makes the active roster. He was getting run early in the season. And I think the real turning point for him, even though he was playing before this, the turning point for him was when Clyde Edwards-Helaire went out with the injury. We have not seen him since. And I think that is in large part due to the high level that Pacheco has played at. What impresses me most about him, but really that running back tandem between he and Jerick McKinnon, who is, I mean, he's an anomaly in and of itself. What player at running back misses 2.5 years and actually comes back and has a career season, which is what Jerick McKinnon did this year with 9 receiving touchdowns. Those two guys complement each other so well. Jerick is your pass blocker. He is your third down back. He is your receiving back. And Isaiah Pacheco, you said it best, Mike. He's tough. He runs so hard. He is your north to south runner, and he wants to run right into you. And we have seen across really the second half of the season, as he's starting to get more and more comfortable in this offense, they're putting a little bit more on his plate. Last week, all of a sudden, only had, I think, 26 yards rushing, but he caught 5 passes for a career high 59 yards.
Yep.
That wasn't something. He was never a pass catcher at Rutgers in college, and he was not heavily featured in the pass game earlier in this season. But they're starting to trust him more. He's developing that rapport with Patrick Mahomes. He has been wildly impressive. I haven't heard one Kansas City Chiefs fan have a single complaint with how he's played. And that may not sound that impressive, but when you think about the history of running back with the Chiefs over the last 5 years, they've been looking for anything since Kareem Hunt. Well, since they dismissed Kareem Hunt. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, first-round pick, never has been able to figure it out. Damian Williams was great during the playoff run, but then he was on a different team the next year. There has been no stability in that running back room. It seems like, at least for the moment, the Chiefs have found it, and the timing couldn't be better.
That would be crucial, Mike.
Yeah, definitely. Going to the matchup itself with the Eagles, probably a great scenario for the neutral viewer, in that these are the two best teams in football this year. Really, just it probably has to be all about execution. I don't think there's a single clear glaring weakness, but if there is any major concerns on the Chiefs side of things when you're going up against the Eagles, what would it be? What is strategy that Andy Reid has to try and find a way to cover up in order to win the game?
Well, I think the first thing you look at is what the Eagles do well. They are one of the most dynamic offenses in the NFL. Frank Clark kind of explained it as a college offense, and he wasn't saying it in a negative, in that, Frank Clark went to Michigan. He likened it to the early 2000 Ohio State, Jim Tressel, where they really leverage the defensive ends to make a decision. And that's what Jalen Hurts does so well. It's, you're going to make a decision, and based off what you do, we're going to exploit it. And now that he has arguably the best receiving core in the NFL at his disposal, it makes that team and that offense so dynamic. So the first thing I look at is, how can the Chiefs linebackers hold up against the most dynamic rushing attack in the NFL? Nick Bolton was amongst the league leaders in tackles this season. He's not your lateral quickness guy. He's not the Patrick Willis, Brian Urlacher, Luke Kuechly, sideline to sideline type guy. That's Willie Gay. Unfortunately, Willie Gay suffered a shoulder injury against Cincinnati last week.
Yeah.
You do have that extra week to get ready, but if that linebacker core is not at full strength, all of a sudden you start to get kind of concerned about how you're going to contain Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell, right? They can throw a lot of different guys at you that have different skill sets. So that's the first thing I look at. And then offensively for the Chiefs, it's sort of the same story. What made that win so impressive was at the end of the game, Patrick Mahomes was throwing passes to Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Marcus Kemp. Marcus Kemp was a practice squad player. This guy does not, he's been on the Chiefs forever. He's one of those guys that sort of you throw out like, oh yeah, Marcus Kemp, because he's been on the team for the last 5 years, but he's never on the active roster. Thank goodness he was activated last week because they needed him.
Yeah.
It looks like McCole Hardman is probably done for the year. We'll see about Juju Smith-Schuster. We'll see about Kadarius Toney, but at what level do you start to get concerned of this offense not being at full strength again versus one of the league's best defenses, specifically the league's best pass rush in Philadelphia. So injuries really are the first thing that come to mind when I think about concerns going up against a really, really good Eagles team.
The thing that, or there was actually one player there, Nick, that you did not bring up actually throughout every single one, L'Jarius Sneed, who's out with a concussion now. And that is something that's crucial because he pretty much covers the opposing number one wideout. And his assignment was against Jamar Chase in the last game. And now you would expect he would be on AJ Brown come the Super Bowl. But now with his status unknown at this time, where do you see Steve Spagnuolo going, in terms of potentially, guarding this two-headed monster in both Brown and Devontae Smith?
Well, what the interesting thing about Sneed is he's not your prototypical cover corner, but he is a Swiss Army knife. He's probably as versatile of a cornerback as there is in the NFL. You're right. They're always going to put him on the other team's number one receiver, but they're also going to put him near the line of scrimmage. Spags is great at dialing up those exotic blitz packages and keeping offenses guessing, and he'll bring Sneed up all of a sudden, and he's getting a sack. I think he had 3 sacks this year, so they move him all over, and when you take him out of that equation, there is nobody to replace him. It's not like a next man up because of how versatile his skill set is. So without him, you're looking at a cornerback room featuring Trent McDuffie, rookie, Joshua Williams, rookie, Jalen Watson, rookie.
Yeah.
And they more than held their own against the Bengals last week. But are you telling me you're going to have to run it back for 4 quarters against the league's 3rd highest scoring offense? That is a scary proposition. So you're right. There was a glaring omission because L'Jarius Sneed is on the short list behind a guy like Chris Jones in terms of most important players to this Chiefs defense.
Yeah, it's really scary to think, especially, now towards the end of the season, when you look at the other side of things, Philadelphia, they pretty much hobbled into the playoffs. And then, with having that bye, they were able to kind of get healthy rather quickly. And now they're at full strength for the most part. But now you look at the Chiefs side, and now it's kind of the opposite. Now they're really beginning to decline in terms of health at the wrong time. So we'll see what goes on there. But, now I guess we'll look at the mental side of things here. And, I think, Nick, you look at the special teams too, and Harrison Butker toward, down the stretch where, she struggled a bit, and as did special teams too. We obviously heard about Sky Moore too. We saw what he did in that final return that pretty much set up the game winner. Things looked great there, down the stretch. But again, with Butker struggling, in the latter portion of the season, what was it that really, changed for him and really for the special teams room?
You tell me if you have an answer to that question. I'd love to hear those 2 guys that you just mentioned, Harrison Butker and Sky Moore. Let me paint a picture for you guys of how things were going for them in Kansas City. People were running them out of town because that was the only thing holding this team back. Muffed punts, missed field goals, shanked extra points. I'm telling you right now, every Chiefs fan, if you go pull 100 Chiefs fans, 99 of them would have told you, if you had asked them, hey, how's the Chiefs season end? They would have said one of those 2 things. It's going to be the AFC Championship game, and Butker's going to miss a chip shot field goal, and then we go home. Same thing with Sky Moore, because Sky Moore never returned punts. He never returned punts in college. And they said, you know what we should do with this guy? Let's send him back there and have him return punts. And once. And like, let's give him another shot. And he fumbled it twice. You know what? He's getting the hang of things. And Chiefs fans are pulling their hair out at this point. With the muffed punts, that's not something you ever expect, and it's an easy fix. You would think like, hey, have somebody else do it. There's 53 guys on the roster, so there's got to be one of them with a little more experience in this regard. The missed field goals, I don't know. Harrison Butker coming into this season was the 2nd most accurate kicker in NFL history.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Butker. So this is the kind of crazy part. He suffers an injury week 1. Where at? In Arizona.
Yeah.
That turf was, Trent McDuffie, your 1st round pick at cornerback, also suffered an injury. I think it was a hamstring injury.
Yeah.
Week 1. And it was so bad to the point where Andy Reid came out afterwards and was kind of saying like, hey, they got to get this thing fixed because that is not NFL quality turf, especially for week one when you've had all off season to prepare. So Butker suffers that injury. And ever since then, he wasn't the same. Now, I don't know if that's due to injuries. He was dealing with back spasms a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure some of that's mental, like you alluded to, Joey. Like at one point, you miss one, you miss two, you miss three. All of a sudden, you kind of think, what am I doing wrong? Even if you're not doing anything wrong, it does start to seep into your head. Those seeds of doubt have been planted, and then they grow like wildfire. So I don't know what was plaguing him then. All I know is a lot of people in Kansas City are happy that he was able to kind of push through that because they couldn't afford for him to have one of those games against Cincinnati. If he would have had one of those games that we saw 3 or 4 times throughout the regular season, it's the Bengals in the Super Bowl instead of the Chiefs.
Yeah, that's very true. And again, they did not want to see, or any Chiefs fan would not want to see what happened, with Brett Maher too. We know all of that stuff too. So I don't think they even want to hear that name or even compare that with Harrison Butker. So, but yeah, no, like I said, again, the mental aspect too, in addition to the physical part too. Now, let me ask you this, just I guess off topic for a second though. Isn't Arizona grass though? Don't they roll out that grass and then, right?
And I think they do. I think they bring in like an entirely new field for this Super Bowl.
Unbelievable.
So hopefully, everybody's praying that they're going to do that. I think the NFL sort of takes over at that point.
That's oh boy. We'll leave it at that. Oh boy, yeah. But my last question for you before we get back to Mike to conclude our chat. Chris Jones, Frank Clark, those two are just the guys. And Chris Jones has just been he's been an absolute dynamo. I think that's the best way to put it. And, from what you've seen from those two and from what Frank Clark has really, he's grown into his own over the last few years. And now he's got Chris Jones, alongside him. It's truly amazing to see what this defensive line has really blossomed into.
Yeah, and Chris Jones is he's an interesting guy to talk about because the Super Bowl year 2019, he has a career year, 15 and a half sacks, and all of a sudden you think, okay, I think he was 26 years old at that time, and you think, okay, you've got the next budding superstar pass rusher, and then he had 2 straight years where he didn't get double-digit sacks. You go back to the AFC Championship game last year, there were two times in the fourth quarter where Chris Jones had his hands on Joe Burrow, couldn't bring him down. And that failure, for lack of a better term, fueled his offseason. And he said it. He's come out and said, he said, that moment where I couldn't bring him down and knowing I had a chance to win us the game fueled me to, he gets in the best shape of his life. I know we hear it all the time, but he comes back this year, doesn't just have a career year where, he's one of the top 2 or 3 defensive players in football right there with Joey Bosa and Micah Parsons. But he closed games. There were 6 times this year in the fourth quarter of a 1-score game where Chris Jones brings down the quarterback. That's a closer that you don't see defensively. And those would be games where he's not imposing his will because he's getting double teamed every single game, every single week. Doesn't matter the opponent. Chris Jones is getting double teamed because they don't respect the other guys. They don't respect Carlos Dunlap and Frank Clark and George Karlaftis and Mike Dana. When you got an all-pro in the middle, it's really easy to decide who you want to dedicate your attention to. And still, he ends the season with 15 and a half sacks. And last week was the reason the Chiefs won the game. Like, if you made me pick one reason why the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, I know it's really easy to just default to Patrick Mahomes. He's the greatest player in the NFL. Chris Jones won them that game. Chris Jones took over that game defensively, and doing it on the interior. We're really the only guy in the last decade who you would say consistently dominates games on the interior defensive line is Aaron Donald. Right. And Donald didn't have the season that we're used to seeing him have this year. Make no mistake about it, Chris Jones is the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL. And he has risen his level to not just being a really good pass rusher, but he's to the point where he can take over games. He can dominate games and he can close games. We saw all of that against Cincinnati last week.
Yeah, his name now is definitely out there, and alongside, or well, I would say, I don't want to say alongside, but I would say even one rung just below Aaron Donald. And again, it's still to have those two, or rather to have Chris Jones's name in the same sentence or in the same breath as Aaron Donald is really amazing for him. And as you brought up, the season that he bounced back with after single-digit sack numbers, so. Pretty good stuff. I'm pumped to see what happens against one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, in the Eagles too, going up against that. But Mike, close us out here with our final question.
Yeah, so Nick, we've gone through everything coming into this matchup surrounding the Chiefs and whatnot. What's your prediction? What do you think's going to happen in this game, especially what do you think score-wise?
Man, it's so weird seeing the way this team has played the last 3 weeks, because the defense is peaking and they're playing at a level that they weren't prior. I'll be honest with you guys, coming into the playoffs, I didn't have the Chiefs making the Super Bowl. I thought the Bills were a team of destiny, so to speak. And then we saw what happened against Cincinnati. And so it's crazy how your perception of a team can change with a week or two of time. It's tough to find weaknesses with the Eagles. So it's tough for me to make an argument for the Chiefs based on their opponent, just to say, well, the Eagles aren't that. The Eagles have been the most consistent team in football all season. All season. There's no team that played better football more consistently than Philadelphia. And if it weren't for Jalen Hurts' injury, he would be the guy who is the no-brainer MVP instead of Patrick Mahomes. I don't think that's a stretch to say. With that being said, I do think the experience factor across the board really lends itself towards the Chiefs. And that's not to say that the Eagles can't just figure it out. Jalen Hurts has played in big games. And Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, these guys have played in Super Bowls. But we know who the two most important guys on the field for both teams are: head coach and quarterback. And the Chiefs have a massive advantage in the experience department over those two. On top of that, kind of like we saw at the end of the game, if I'm ever on the fence between how a game's going to go, I'm going to say one team's got Mahomes and the other doesn't. Jalen Hurts is a phenomenal quarterback, but Joe Burrow was a phenomenal quarterback. And we saw who got outplayed last week. It seems almost mythical, but Mahomes just makes you feel like you're never out of it. He makes you feel like no matter how much your back is against the wall, you're going to find a way to fight your way out and end up victorious. So I think this is a great game. I think it's the best possible matchup we could have been treated to in a Super Bowl. It's rare where you feel like you get to the end of the season and it truly is the two best teams in football. But I think that's what we got. I'm going to go Chiefs 27, Eagles 24 in what should be just an incredible Super Bowl matchup.
Well, I'm pumped to see what goes on in about 9 days' time. So, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot thank Nick Schwert enough for coming on. Nick, thank you so much. Arrowhead Pride's very own SB Nation's Kansas City Chiefs blogger. Listen, Nick, where can we find you on social media? Just let everyone know where we could find you.
Well, my last name's a nightmare, so I'm going to have to spell it out for you. It's Nick_Schwert. That's SCHWERDT. Yeah. I handle social media for Arrowhead Pride, also a staff writer for Arrowhead Pride, and I'm on the midday show for 610 Sports Radio here in Kansas City, Cody and Gold. So we'll be headed down to Phoenix on Sunday to cover what should be a circus of a week down in the desert.
Well, enjoy Radio Row, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us just a few days before your trek down to the desert, and enjoy the Super Bowl, man. Should be tons of fun. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, fellas.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Nick Schwert. Nick, again, so many good things that we got a chance to talk about tonight, Mike. And, we won't really dive that much into it just because obviously next week we want to leave that with the two of us and Ian Schraier too. So we'll move on to our next topic just because, we're going to keep all of our Super Bowl talk for next week. So, Mike, we left off. Go on.
Keep the mystery alive.
Exactly. You see? There you go. Yes, we keep the mystery alive, and we appreciate him coming on. And we were talking about early on with D'Amico Ryans, and we spoke about him with that 6-year deal, and I know just before we stopped that, I wanted to add a few more things there. I didn't realize this, Mike, that D'Amico Ryan's from so many names that have been on that roster. Houston doesn't have, and ever since their inception, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you wouldn't think that that they have a decent amount of defensive players that I thought would be not named D'Amico Ryans. That was the franchise leader in tackles. I thought maybe, Merciless or potentially someone else that would be a leader in tackles. 479 total tackles. D'Amico Ryans is the franchise leader in on the defensive side. 2-time All-Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler with Houston and Philadelphia. And some of these numbers too, Mike, which really I think clinched him this job. The 49ers in 2021, third fewest yards per game, 310 back in 2021. Fifth fewest points per game, 20.6. And then in 2022, he makes it even better. 16.8 points per game on the defensive side of things. I mean, that is unheard of.
Unreal. I mean, that's incredible defense. Listen, I think going back to what we said before, like it's a great hire in terms of just the name itself. He was drafted by the team. He's familiar to the fan base. He's a familiar name to all of them, and whatnot. And I think you hope he brings a lot of that. It starts out with the defense, brings a lot of the defensive skill set and tenacity and proficiency that they had at San Francisco over to Houston, and build the building blocks from there to resurrect this program. Which, like we said, Houston, to put it simply, has struggled. That's just, scratching the surface of things. I think, like you said, he turned down the Denver Broncos job, and I think, it's because he wants to build from the ground up. They're going to be the number 1 overall pick, or number 2 right there. So you're going to have your choice of pretty much your quarterback. I'm assuming they're going to draft quarterback. So you got your choice of quarterback and really how to mold your team, whereas Denver has the quarterback in place, has other certain pieces in place. Not that that's totally bad, but maybe it's more advantageous. You're starting out as a head coach and you're able to put all these foundational pieces, in place to your liking. So it's interesting. I think they've given him a long leash with 6 years and whatnot, although we've seen the previous kind of track record with Houston and quick triggers right away in terms of firing coaches. But it's going to be really interesting, and we wish him the best of luck to try and bring this Houston Texans program, back from irrelevancy. Really, he's got quite the job ahead of him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we know, like I said, what Dameon Pierce is all about too, and he's got Davis Webb right now. And as of and we'll see. Obviously, now they have the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. So we'll see what goes on there in terms of, is it a Bryce Young? Is it a Will Levis? We'll see who's going to be selected down there, or is it someone else? We expect probably it'll be Bryce Young. Keep that Alabama train alive, or if you will, or that connection alive, if you will, especially now with D'Amico Ryans in the fold. He was obviously Alabama royalty too back in 15, 16 years ago. God, we're getting old. Mike, something else too. We keep on the train of head coaches, and Sean Payton was just last week in the Fox broadcast studio out in Los Angeles for the NFC Championship game, and or rather in the NFC divisional game. He was not in, I don't think he was in studio or anywhere for the NFC Championship game in Philadelphia. I think because all of this had gone down just before.
He was on NBC, I think. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, you're right. Fox. That's right.
I think you're thinking about Drew Brees from a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But nonetheless, New Orleans traded their former head coach, Sean Payton, because when he abruptly retired, he still had, I think, another year on his contract. So if he were to come back at all, similar to, for those hockey fans that are watching, if they remember what happened with Ilya Kovalchuk when he up and left, or potentially when other players had just up and left also, they have their rights to them. When they come back into the league, or they come back into an organization, or whatever the case may be, similar to Tom Brady also, if he were to come out of retirement, Tampa Bay still owns his rights. So now what happens here with Sean Payton is that they still owned his rights, or I guess they still owned his contractual rights. And he was traded to the Denver Broncos for a 2023 first-round draft pick, the 29th overall pick. So now, for those that want to know where they got the San Francisco pick from, let's read you this large family tree. So the 2023 first-round 29th overall pick. So that was initially traded from Miami in the Bradley Chubb deal. And where did it originate from? From San Francisco, when San Francisco traded up to pick Trey Lance. Keep that in mind too. That is where it all came from. So it came to New Orleans via Denver, via Miami, and then from San Francisco. That is the originator. So 4 different teams have held the 29th overall pick. That's really wild to think. I can only, Mike, I'm actually curious. That's something we'll have to look up one of these days.
Yeah, probably a record for sure.
It's got to be a record. 4 teams and that 29th overall pick just traveling across the country. Amazing stuff. But he was traded there. And, sticking to topic, Mike, it boggles my mind how Denver has given up the house and this new ownership, and their future is, I'll be honest with you, at stake at this point. They are going to be worse than the 2010 decade Los Angeles Lakers, where they were pretty much irrelevant. And this Denver Broncos team, they're going for it all. And if they don't get anything together with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, this is going to be years of hell for Payton, because now they have to reverse all of that culture that was built under Hackett. And it's going to take a lot of time for Sean Payton to input his culture and to lay down that foundation, because he's not bringing the culture from New Orleans. He's building whatever he's got there with the guys he's got. And he also has Russell Wilson too, who is obviously an all-pro, a Super Bowl champion. But you've got a lot of guys around you that still need to kind of find their place in this locker room. What do you see with this here? And obviously it's I think the two of us can synonymously say that it is a good hire or a good trade, but at what cost did it come at in the future?
Yeah, I remember the last time we were on, way back when we were talking about the possibility of this and the rumors surrounding it, Payton to Denver when it was first coming around. What did I say? Payton was going to go to Denver, and what happened? Here we are. Denver paid up the compensation or whatnot. Cost is a lot. Like you look when ESPN first announced it, and you have the graphic where they put on each side what the assets that they gave up for Russell Wilson and for Sean Payton. It's a boatload.
Yeah.
But when they already gave up that much for Russell Wilson, you're already putting your future at stake. You went all out to get a quarterback when Drew Lock really for a number of years was not working out. So might as well continue to push all the chips to the table and go out and get Sean Payton. It's a lot of assets, but they've taken the gamble, and now they have, I think, premium options at the 2 most important positions in football: your head coach and your quarterback, in Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. And I think a lot predicates in terms of how much does Russell Wilson have left. He struggled mightily last year under a coach in Nathaniel Hackett that looked like he just clearly was not ready to be a head coach. File it under the eons and eons of examples of great coordinators that did not pan out as head coaches. Maybe he'll get his chance again another day and whatnot, but it just really did not work out, and they fired him midseason. That offense was just atrocious. And so, how much does Russell Wilson have left? I think he has a little bit more left in the tank than a lot of people are giving him credit for. We saw in the last couple of games before, or rather after Hackett was fired to end off the season, it was some of Wilson's best performances of the year.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's, was Legion of Boom-esque way back when in the Seattle days, but it was a heck of a lot better than what we saw much early on in the year when he was with the Broncos. So I think that gives you a sign of hope if you're the Denver front office, if you're a Denver Broncos fan, that just that 2-3 game clip right at the end of the season when after Hackett was fired, where Wilson's play just dramatically went up. Maybe it's a sigh of relief from the rest of the squad that, you could play more free. The culture wasn't really going well and whatnot. Now it was all extinguished out. You can have a fresh start. They all played much better. So I think there's something there that Sean Payton can wind up tapping into.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's crazy because what he's all about, too, he's a quarterback guru. We saw what he was capable of doing with Drew Brees. We saw he was able to take out the potential or rather tap into the potential of Taysom Hill, too. That was another big thing. But then also you look at we go back to the draft choices, Mike, that were sent to New Orleans in return. In addition to that 29th overall pick, a 2024 second round pick and a 2024 third round pick. So all in total, it cost for just Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, the defensive end, 3 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks, as well as a third-round pick. That's 5 different key components that have gone back to both Seattle and New Orleans for just 2 individuals. It's a lot. It's a lot. And again, this is new ownership that is obviously willing to buy in and buy whatever it is to win a championship. But again, if you're trying to do this, you have to kind of do it the right way because, again, you're going up against a salary cap. This is not baseball where you can tap into the luxury tax and have tons of dead cap and, you're able to, okay, well, we've got dead cap, so we're just going to keep on, we're going to keep on buying. We'll figure it out. You have to maneuver a cap situation. Look at New Orleans' situation. I think they're about, I don't know, I think 30 million under the cap and they usually, or over the cap rather, and they usually are anyway, but they just have to maneuver money and whatnot. And it takes a mathematical genius to do that. But be that as it may, you don't want to be in that situation year after year. And if you don't put certain guys around Russell Wilson and the franchise player, as well as your head coach, it's tough. But the positive, though, is that we know Sean Payton can develop players as well. And that, I believe, is what they're banking on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, listen, he brings a wealth of experience compared to what they had with Hackett. He brings a wealth of experience in terms of head coaching.
Yeah.
They have a lot of foundational pieces in place. You look at it on paper, they have a lot of pieces in place. You think for a team that needs to contend, they had, I think it was a top 10 defense, or there have been several years recently they've had a top 10 defense. They have a couple of good young receivers.
Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, those are 2 great guys to start off your ascent, I guess you could say.
Sure.
And Javonte Williams, the running back, he got injured. I think he should be coming back.
Yep.
So you have some good foundational pieces on both sides of the ball for an ascending team. It's just putting this all together. Can Payton tap into a little bit of what Russell Wilson once was? I think it's going to be a learning process for Russell Wilson as well. And that I don't think he can, the let Russ cook kind of, trend is going to be as much of a thing anymore. I think he has to accept part of that. Not that he's going to turn into a pure pocket passer and just be Drew Brees every 2.5 seconds throwing out the ball and whatnot, but I think he's going to have to learn to adjust on his part in that, listen, last year was an absolute god-awful year, probably the worst year of his professional career from an individual and team standpoint. But now as he gets older, you got to learn you probably not going to be able to scramble and do those extreme off-schedule plays that he loves to do. You're going to have to get the ball out quicker often. You're going to have to play within a structure, which is how Peyton wants to run the offense. So I think they have gambled a lot, the Broncos, but I think there's a lot of experience here that I think there's an upside. The problem is, like, you're in a pretty tough division. Like, even if they do well, you have Justin Herbert coming up. We don't like Brandon Staley very much, and I don't think
I don't think any Chargers fans do.
I think he should have been fired, but nonetheless, the Chargers are going to charge her, and they kept him around. But they're still going to be a quality team pushing for the playoffs next year.
Yeah. And
you still have the specter of the Chiefs. Like, your hope, I think, is to get second place. But I think there's something to tap into here. And it's a massive gamble. I think if you don't win a Super Bowl within the contract length that Wilson has, even one is always huge enough when it comes to this sport. If you win one by the time if you don't win one, rather, by the end of Wilson's monster contract that they signed him to, it's going to be a massive failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And and you brought up the fact about Russell Wilson potentially scrambling, and he has to adjust his playing style. Well, obviously, that also brings up the fact too that they had some injuries along their offensive line as well. And, so many different guys had gotten hurt, and they had a lot of different combinations on the offensive line guarding, obviously protecting Russell Wilson. And there really was not a lot of cohesion, if you will, down the stretch because there were so many injuries and lackluster play and everything along those lines. So I'm intrigued to definitely see what happens next year. But you brought it up perfectly. They have a solid foundation already, and we brought up some names too. Obviously, with Cortland Sutton, they've got Justin Simmons too. They've got Garrett Bowles, I believe he was another one who had gotten hurt too. They still have Randy Gregory. He's another one that got hurt. A lot of guys on this roster, though, they are most of the time oft injured. That's the tough part too. So, there's going to be some issues there that they're going to have to figure out when it comes to salary cap and maneuvering certain guys, whatever. Hey, listen, they traded away, obviously, Bradley Chubb. So that was their best defensive player at the time to Miami. He then subsequently signed a 5-year, $100 million extension in South Beach. And now he's playing with Vic Fangio too, who just recently signed on to become Mike McDaniel's defensive coordinator. And, this was not on the rundown, Mike, but I think it's definitely worth bringing up, and it's a perfect segue. This is, I believe, a big, big failure for the Denver Broncos, similar to the way, as we said in the beginning of our show, how DeMeco Ryans said, no, that's okay. I'm going to go for my dream job in Houston. When you hear dream job in Houston, that brings up some, light bulbs, right? But then when you spurn Denver, go to Houston, but then you also have Vic Fangio, who was linked for so many months to Sean Payton, saying, yeah, wherever Payton goes, Fangio is going to go with him. And then he goes to Miami. Is that a sign of concern that maybe the organization is in peril?
I'm not too sure. I think maybe for Fangio, it's probably just time for a fresh start. He's been at Denver for eons. So I think if you're a Broncos fan, you would have been absolutely pumped if you would have had Peyton and Fangio on the same staff. I mean, the amount of experience you would have had there would have been unbelievable.
Sure.
Peyton wasn't their first choice as a head coach. And obviously that's mainly due to the fact that it had to be a trade. It was compensation you'd have to give back to New Orleans. So it's a telltale sign that they couldn't turn anywhere else and are like oh, well, we're going to have to pony up the compensation. We're not able to get anyone else. That's slightly concerning. I think part of it is just that anyone joining there, anytime you're making a new head coach hire, they love to mold the team, right? You're not going to mold this Denver team. Like Russell Wilson was traded for and has been signed on to for the next 7 years. Now, what, 6 after last year?
Yeah.
So he's signed there on big money. Obviously, that hampers all other sorts of deals and whatnot since you have the cap. But there's really not any molding to do. It's Peyton coming in, and you got to coach this team up. Like we said, there's foundational pieces there. You have the quarterback there. So I think that's why they probably had to ultimately turn to Peyton, is that, other head coaches wanting to come in, you really don't have any maneuverability to mold this team. It's ready made. It's supposed to be ready made. So I think the Fangio thing, I think probably the hope and what I believe it is just he wants a fresh start. And I mean, he got absolutely paid by Miami. I think he's going to be the highest paid coordinator this upcoming season.
Yeah.
Maybe ever, I think it is. So, I mean, hey, when
Got paid like a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, when you're getting paid that kind of money, I don't blame him wanting to leave. And you get a fresh start. I think it's a massive, massive pickup for Miami. It's a huge. I think that's the one side of, other than the uncertainty with Tua Tagovailoa and what's going on at quarterback. That's a huge part of the team that they need to figure out.
Yeah, and it's funny because also now that we know, obviously there's so many different guys around the NFL, one of which being Todd Bowles being a one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. He's not head coach material. We know about Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. He is not head coach material. Frank Reich, arguably he's a top 15 offensive coordinator, not head coach material. But hey, listen, Carolina's going to continue to pander, and here they are. But we'll see what happens there. But again, one strong year from him in 2017 hasn't really panned out. Is he a flash in the pan? We don't know. We'll see. But going back to everything with Denver, though, with just a couple of numbers with Russell Wilson, though, he had an 84% QBR rating, and compared to his final year in Seattle, 103.1. So tough, though, and a completion rating 60.5 compared to 65% completion rating in Seattle. Yet he did throw more yards per game, though, in Denver, which again doesn't really mean much if you're not getting any wins. So
yeah, just one last note before we move on is that, remember when Wilson first wanted to be traded
yes.
from Seattle, is that one of his 4 preferred destinations was New Orleans when Peyton was still there. So I think there always was a mutual kind of respect and wanting to work together and wanting to be a part of that offense. So I think there's 2 ways that this can go, really. I think there's a very positive way in that Peyton resurrects Wilson and it fulfills the potential that this team has on paper, or Russell Wilson is washed and Denver's future is absolutely down the toilet because of how much they traded away, and they'll just be a mess for the next 8 years.
Right. Then it's bleak. Yeah. Well, we'll see. But, you want to talk about absolutely disastrous quarterback news. Well, we know all about the drama, and we know all about Aaron Rodgers year after year. Mike, it's always drama with him. But what we do know is that San Francisco is not in the running. He answered a couple of questions from reporters and from fans when he was out in Pebble Beach playing in the AT&T Pro-Am, which is always in February, the first weekend of February. Well, it's usually in February, and here we are. It's still going on now. I think the final's on Sunday, but he's playing in it. And he said, and anyone says, "Is there any news on where you're going?" And he said, "I'm not going to San Francisco." So you could X out San Francisco, which again, I don't think that was ever anything in there. I think that was just to throw people off and whatever. But hey, he spoke. He opened his mouth. But what we do know is that Sports Illustrated report a couple of days ago came out that the Jets are potentially willing to go, quote unquote, all out for Aaron Rodgers. And it says also on Aaron Rodgers said on the Pat McAfee show just 3 days ago how Nathaniel Hackett is, quote, my guy, end quote. The two were together in Green Bay in 2021. So he's very familiar with him. And again, put 2 and 2 together. Nathaniel Hackett was hired as Robert Saleh's offensive coordinator for 2023. Does this happen? Will the Jets continue to jet? What is the deal here? Do you see this coming to fruition, or do you see him going to potentially Las Vegas to play with Davante Adams again?
Ooh, I have so many feelings on this. I think for the Jets, on the field wise, I mean, this has been a fan base that has been starving for success. They had the little blip in 2010 where they made the back-to-back AFC championship appearances, and they thought Mark Sanchez was the guy, and then he wasn't. And then he became the Philadelphia Eagles legend, Mark Sanchez.
That's correct. Yes, can't forget that.
Yeah, what a time. So this has been a fan base that's been starving for success, and Wilson has really been up and down. And then I think part of it also was the now infamous press conference where didn't really take accountability to the offense's poor play in that game against New England, where they got Deshaun Jackson right at the end. So you got doubts about Wilson going forward, and this is a team that, I mean, I'm not saying the Jets are Super Bowl and whatnot, obviously not, but they're a ready-made roster to contend in that, again, they got foundational pieces. They have a solid receiving core, and Garrett Wilson is a heck of a receiver to start your offense off with, the 1,000-yard receiver this past year. You got Breece Hall coming back next year off of his injury. He was one of the top running backs in all of football before he went down. The defense, I think you got to, even though Jet fans are really back and forth and aren't exactly, don't really have Robert Saleh in great company right now, he's done a good job with that defense. So they have a lot of pieces set in place right there. They haven't had a great quarterback in eons. Why not go out and get Aaron Rodgers, who, unlike Brett Favre when the Jets went out and got him, Aaron Rodgers is at his age is playing a heck of a lot better than Brett Favre was at that time. He was just an MVP, a back-to-back MVP the year before, not too long ago. So
yeah.
I think on the field, it makes all the sense in the world. Go for it. You have the capital. You have the cap space. Go out and lock down this position for the next 3 years. But it's also just the media circus. Like, it's so annoying with this guy. Was he going to leave Green Bay? Was he not what it was last year? Then he signs the four-year deal, and you think, all right, well, that's the end of that conversation. He's going to retire a Packer and whatnot. And now it's this year. Oh, it's will he, won't he all over again. You're like, huh? Why would you have signed the big mega deal, 4-year contract then? And I'm sure if you're Green Bay, you're absolutely annoyed with this guy. Yeah, he's been a phenomenal quarterback for the franchise ever since he's came into the league. He's a Super Bowl champion way back when. But I mean, the way the franchise has gone, they drafted Jordan Love when they probably shouldn't have, because Aaron Rodgers resurrected himself. Late career renaissance.
Right.
Now, it was will he, won't he stay? And that indecisiveness led them to seeing Davante Adams leave. And now it's, where do we go from here? And if he's gone, I mean, where's Green Bay going to go from there? I think just how it frustrates me how back and forth non-committal he's been, especially after just last year. You signed for 4 years, so.
Yeah. It boggles my mind too, Mike. And you know what? It to me, if I'm a Jets fan, and I know a lot of Jets fans, they want Aaron Rodgers, and why wouldn't you, right? If you have the ability to land him with the cap space that you've got, which ironically enough, they really don't have much. Once they do some maneuvering, they will have the cap space. As they sit right now, they are $3 million over the cap. But again, they've got a lot of money to move. Corey Davis is due $11 million this year. If the Jets really want to make a move and to potentially be serious, they'll cut him. I think their losses are only like $700,000 dead cap. So they'd save $11 million there by cutting him and potentially going for, I don't know, maybe T. Higgins, which we'll get to in a few moments, but we'll see. What we do know also is that there's also another player that's very familiar with Robert Saleh that is out there. Jimmy Garoppolo. Why not take the chance there and continue to build through the draft? Do you want to do that? That's the way that Joe Douglas has ran. That's the way that Joe Douglas has learned under Howie Roseman in Philadelphia. It all depends, though, again, how much pressure and what kind of flack he's getting from above with Woody Johnson and company. Because we know for as long as ever how Joe Douglas and his coaching staff that was hired by him, Robert Saleh, they did not want Zach Wilson to be playing. They figured it was over. But there were a lot of reports, Mike, and I know you and I heard this, that Woody Johnson and company, they wanted to stick with Zach Wilson. So you figure you're going to go with your boss is the one that's signing your checks. Okay, if you say, let's go with Zach Wilson, well, we have no choice. You're signing our checks. So let's see this kid fail. And sure enough, he did. So now, after seeing the, I told you so moment, to me, I would still say that you should probably just sign Jimmy Garoppolo because he wouldn't be as expensive and you could still move, you could still get certain players. And if, again, you sign maybe a 1-year fully guaranteed contract with a few of, with a few incentives or options for year 2 or 3 or something along those lines. And, I think that they would want the world, Green Bay, for the face of their franchise, and rightfully so. I'm just not on board with the Jets trading away so much and going all out. The Jets are right there. They are right there to make the playoffs. And I think that if they were to do that and to trade the house for him, it's a big mistake.
Yeah, the only thing when it comes to Jimmy Garoppolo's injury, that's the only thing. Injury availability and whatnot, and then in that case, you're right back where you started in turning to Zach Wilson in the middle of the year. Which, listen, he did well in the first part of the year. I think more than people can give him credit for.
Sure.
They started out 5-3. They were doing really well. Then everything just fell off a cliff. And then all the press conference stuff with accountability came into play. So there's clearly internal doubts. And I think in the wide receiver room, there was kind of, a little bit of chatter about having some problems with Wilson and kind of the way he was going about things.
And look at Garrett Wilson, too. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Look at the other Wilson. Look at Garrett Wilson. He basically called out a few times after that New England game, too. He called out his own quarterback.
Yeah, so I wouldn't surprise we see a new one. That's my only thing when it comes to Garoppolo's injury. So going, I think it's going to be real fascinating. I know people will throw Derek Carr out there because that's less compensation. I think that would just be a straight free agency situation as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he would be traded because of the guarantees that are right now. We'll see if he gets released, because once he gets released.
Right.
Yeah, unless they work out a trade now, then potentially they could get something going. But again, it's all on the matter of how much these guys are worth. And that's why I'm saying is that when you're right there on the cusp of making the playoffs and potentially propelling in the AFC East, that right now is, in my opinion, and I know it's probably unpopular for a lot, I believe, truthfully, that the AFC East is in limbo. Why? Buffalo losing to Cincinnati basically shook up that snow globe. No pun intended, because Buffalo was snowy. Shook up that snow globe and now puts Miami up front, Buffalo there too, trying to hold on and hanging on by a thread. And New England is just a piece or two away from contending for a divisional title again. Why can't the Jets do that the exact same way? And if you do it smart, you can also be in that snow globe too, and you could be a part of that. That's just me.
Yeah, I think the other side of it will just be knowing that you're that close. The division is that tight, and then knowing how loaded the AFC is, you have so many pieces in place. Why not just go for it?
It's fair.
I just I don't think I'd be opposed to them acquiring him. Like I just am frustrated with the kind of media circus that comes
Yes.
with it. You dealt with it with Brett Favre, albeit Rodgers' level of play right now is way higher than Favre was at this point. So I think it's just got to come with the territory. I think you do have to pull the trigger and not play the safe side, because it's hard to play the safe side when it comes to the AFC. It is just so loaded. No
Yeah.
matter what you do in the next 5 to 10 years, if you want to contend, if you want to take that next step, you are going through Josh Allen. You are going through Patrick Mahomes. You are going through Joe Burrow.
Yep.
You're going through Justin Herbert. It's not going to be easy. And I think in the immediate term, if the Jets can, go out and acquire that great quarterback in Rodgers the next 3 years, put yourself right there to contend in a manner in which they haven't for the last 20 years. So I'm all for it in terms of on the field, but it's going to be interesting how they manage the off the field aspects of it, the way Rodgers deals with the media. On the Green Bay side of things, just quickly,
Sure.
if I'm Green Bay, I'm sorry, this may be a hot take. I want Rodgers gone. He's 37 years old. I just signed him to a 4-year mega deal last year, and now I have to worry about will he, won't he, even the possibility of him retiring and whatnot, which I think is a far off possibility, but that's been thrown out there. But I'd want him gone. I signed him to a 4-year deal last year, knowing that, okay, this is going to be set for the next couple of years. Let's see how we can maneuver the cap and get whatever pieces we need to get back to where we were again. And now all I have to hear about for halfway for half the off season leading into the draft and whatnot is Aaron Rodgers going to be my quarterback? Is he going somewhere? Is he whatnot? What are you guys thinking? What are the talks like with Rodgers? I think if I'd be someone in the Green Bay front office, I'm frankly pissed off about that. Go somewhere else. Let me restart. Whether it's the Jets, bring back Zach Wilson. I'll develop him and rebuild him. Or whoever I trade to. Let's say you trade to someone without a clear quarterback option to come the other way, like the Rams had with Goff and Stafford making that switch. You get a draft pick and you draft a replacement. Or now you're going to hand the keys to Jordan Love. And yeah, it's not going to be great at first, but now he'll actually get a chance to develop. I think if you're Green Bay, just start clean, just start fresh at this point, because I'd be tired of the media circus.
I'd have to agree. And if you think that the media circus in Green Bay is bad, and if he were to come to New York, oh, get ready, because no one's seen anything yet, because it would be 10 times worse here. That's for sure. And you know that.
One other note, just when we mentioned Buffalo in the AFC East, I'll throw this out there. This will be in the preseason previews as well, but I'll throw it out there since we're on the subject of the AFC East. If Buffalo does not make the AFC Championship or the Super Bowl next year or even win it, Sean McDermott is fired. I'll say that right here first. I think we're approaching that territory. I think the urgency has to be there for Buffalo. I mean, every time they're having great year after great year in the regular season. Josh Allen looks fantastic. He's the MVP. They go out and get Stephon Diggs. The offense is firing. They get Von Miller. The defense is good. I get it's not his fault. Obviously, he got injured, but yet again, they failed in the playoffs. Yet again, the last couple years, even though they have everything in place, the league's best offense and whatnot, they don't miss a beat when Brian Daboll leaves and Ken Dorsey takes over as offensive coordinator. At this point, like, what else can you do? You're not hitting that height of getting to the AFC Championship game. You're not hitting the height of getting to the Super Bowl. You have everything in place. This is not year 1, year 2, even year 3. I think at the end of next year will be 5 years of Sean McDermott.
Yeah.
3 out of those 5 years being years with Josh Allen and in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, or 4 out of 5. he's not getting it done next year and reaching those levels, I think you have to say, sorry, Sean, you've been great, but this is as far as it looks like you're going to take this team, and it's time for us to find someone who's going to take us to that next height.
That's definitely some bold take. Again, for those that do not know, Friday, February 3rd, Mike. Yes, we'll cut the clip. Friday, February 3rd, 2023, Mike says if they do not win the Super Bowl or get to the AFC Championship next year, Sean McDermott is gone. 8:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got that on a receipt there. Let's keep on moving forward here, just because we're still on the world of football, and there's still so much to get to, Mike. Mike McCarthy, again, we kind of stick with, the Green Bay connection too. And Mike McCarthy, according to his owner, Jerry Jones, at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, a couple of days ago, came out and said that Mike McCarthy will be calling plays in his typical West Coast offense style. This is the first time that we're going to be seeing it from right out of the mouth of Mike McCarthy to Dak Prescott. And Kellen Moore was obviously hired in Los Angeles to be Justin Herbert's new offensive coordinator. Still, the deal is pending. It was not confirmed yet. But again, that's still whatever. But how do you like this decision, though, with Mike McCarthy being the play caller? Because we heard plenty of times, and this is something that we heard over and over again. Aaron Rodgers, towards the end of 2018, felt that Mike McCarthy's voice got quote-unquote archaic and outdated. And then look at what happened with Mike LaFleur after, when he was hired. So does that happen also with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys offense? Does it get outdated and archaic where things begin to go down, or does it stay plateaued?
Short answer, yes. I think this is a terrible move. The Cowboys should have gone out and hired an offensive coordinator. The big word that everybody used in the last couple years of Green Bay with Mike McCarthy was predictable. Yeah, that's what it was. The offense was just continuing to decline. Aaron Rodgers looked like he was done and buried. His career was done. It looked like that Rodgers was just not that Hall of Fame level, Super Bowl winning level quarterback anymore, that he was into his late 30s. He was over the hill. That was it. Green Bay has to reset. Then Mike LaFleur comes around and turns the whole ship back around, and they've been contending again for the past couple of years, and Aaron Rodgers has been back to his best. So no, I think Mike McCarthy calling plays, not hiring an offensive coordinator, is a decision doomed to fail, especially when it comes with the media circus that surrounds Dallas all the time in the NFL world, and how much each and every play is just going to be scrutinized. There's already doubts about McCarthy, back-to-back 12-game winning seasons, but yet again losing in the playoffs very early on. And now more so than ever, now that he's the chief guy calling plays, every single play is just going to be scrutinized to the highest extent. I think they needed a fresh start from Kellen Moore. As good as he was as a coordinator and whatnot, somebody had to go, right? To start changing things up, because they've been a good team. They've been a good offense and whatnot, top 5 in the league the last couple of years under Moore. But they haven't been going as far in the playoffs. Putting more responsibility under Mike McCarthy was not a good idea. And I think this is just doomed to fail, and that they're going to fail next year, and Mike McCarthy's going to be gone as well. I think for the Chargers, hiring Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator is good. It would have been nice if he was hired by a new head coach. That's right. What should have been done. For Los Angeles, Kellen Moore, like we said with Dallas, he's run a great offense. I think it's going to be a fantastic pairing with Justin Herbert, but for LA's side of it, they needed to be with the new head coach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is something too that, when you look at a lot of other teams that have gone through this, talking about sometimes maybe needing a new voice too. And that's kind of what Aaron Rodgers had with Matt LaFleur. We kept saying Mike, thought about his brother, Mike, who was fired from the Jets and went to the Rams as the new offensive coordinator out there. With Matt LaFleur, obviously they were able to bring him aboard, and now, things look much better, with Aaron Rodgers under center. But Now with Mike McCarthy calling plays, it just, to me, like, I keep thinking about the time when Tony Dungy was in Tampa Bay, right? And many years ago, this was when, Mike, you were probably a fetus, and many years ago, he was the head coach there, and all of these guys, they needed a change. He was eventually fired, but then a couple of years later in Indianapolis, he won the Super Bowl. So you never know. Maybe it's just a change of voice. Maybe it's something, change of play style. You never know. We don't know what McCarthy will bring. He could potentially bring a modernized West Coast offense, which I don't even know if that's legitimate, but we'll see. I mean, maybe there could be some tweaks. You take certain things from experience and you bring it over to the new place. It's possible. I don't expect it to be, but I believe that this has doom written all over it. And it's either you get to the promised land or even close to it. And now, by the way, you have now set your new low, the NFC divisional round, because you just won your first. They won their first wild card road game, or their first road playoff game in over 25 years. Keep that in mind, right? So now their new floor is the NFC divisional round. So now it makes things even harder now under Jerry Jones and for the Cowboys fans. And we know how many injuries they've got. The offensive line is banged up. Still one of the best in the league, though, when healthy. But Micah Parsons, again, he's there. He's, you want to get him at least to an NFC championship game under his rookie contract, because he's going to be making a ridiculous amount of money. Mike, let's keep moving forward here. One last one here in the NFL. Julian Love, New York Giants. Julian Love comments on Nick Sirianni and the Eagles head coach, and says that it's quote unquote a free ride for him as the head coach of the Super Bowl. He called him out, and we had this conversation, Mike, over in our group message, and you and I disagreed with this, because I want to know your side of this, though, and just let the viewer know your side of what Julian Love had brought up with this, and then we'll exchange words the other way.
I think he was a little wrong. I understand what he's trying to get at, and I understand some of the examples we brought up in our conversation and whatnot, but I think he's kind of wrong. Like, does he not get credit for the absolute drastic improvement that Jalen Hurts, the drastic jump that Jalen Hurts has taken this year? He's I don't want to say overnight, but from last year, did you think that Jalen Hurts was going to become an MVP candidate this year? I think every Eagles fan hoped that there was going to be improvement, and certainly being given a great security blanket in A.J. Brown in that trade last year, you're thinking, wow, Jalen Hurts should be taking some sort of a jump. But for the jump that they took and the entire team took this year, I think far surpassed people's expectations. And shouldn't Sirianni get some of that credit there, or even the staff that he helped put together as well? I understand that that roster is experienced. There's guys on there that have been there forever. But I think the conversation way back when was about how aging they were, some of the dead cap money. Then they've been steadily improving again as they got younger. But a lot of that has to be attributed to Sirianni, and I think it just starts from that quarterback development. This is a coach's league. You need to have a good coach in place in order to be successful. And for Philadelphia, it's worked out well, and it's led to Jalen Hurts being the undisputed quarterback of the future for that franchise.
So the exact quote also preceding that one, right? Julian Love says, quote, "You said, Mike, it's a coach's league." He says, quote, "I think it's a player's league, and he's just taking a step back and letting his team play." So this is the part where I will I'll kind of counter you here. So if you look back to the 2012 Philadelphia Eagles, okay, where Vince Young stupidly claimed that it was the dream team, okay? Mike, you were 12 years old. You were in middle school. You were still in a bottle, okay? This was a big deal, okay? 2012, this had Super Bowl written all over it. They had acquired Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie for Kevin Kolb with Arizona. They had, at one point, one of the league's best secondaries, and they also had, or 2011 rather, not 2012, 2011. And, they had Michael Vick at the helm. They had Vince Young as the backup to him. And he said in training camp about that. And that was when it opened up a can of worms, and Andy Reid tried to pretty much shut it down real quick, and it did not work out. It was a disaster year. It was an 8-8 season. I'll never forget it. And, when you look at some of the guys that they had signed the likes of Nnamdi Asomugha, who was one of the best corners, to play the game at that point in time. And then you also look at Jason Babin too, who is a humongous defensive end who had come by way of Tennessee. But then you also had Cullen Jenkins too. I'll never forget that name. I actually had gotten his jersey years ago when I was a kid. And, and I'm just looking here now too, and I forgot the name too, Evan Mathis. They got him too from Cincinnati. And he was an offensive guard, won the Super Bowl with Denver in Super Bowl 50, by the way. And those guys were supposed to be really key to their success. And they had eventually had drafted a few other guys. The offensive line was supposed to be crucial, was supposed to be really good, whatnot. And they started the year 1-4. They were eventually 4-8 by week 13. And it was just an absolute disaster. Why? Because they had Juan Castillo, who was their offensive tackle, become their defensive coordinator. Offensive line coach, become their defensive coordinator. And that's what Andy Reid had kind of, the writing was on the wall at that point. So Vince Young had said dream team and whatnot. And again, it's about the coaches that, sure, you could put a lot of players in a certain scheme, right? But it's all about the scheme that you bring also, right? So yeah, you can put players on a field, right? And you can have the likes of all of those guys, and they could fail. They could all fall flat on their face. Exactly what happened in 2011. But here, because things have changed culturally, and by that season also for the Eagles, Andy Reid was in his last year, right? Or his second to last year. They needed a new voice, and they eventually got it 2 years later with Chip Kelly, which is a whole other conversation. But the bottom line here, though, is that, yes, it is a players' league, but in 2011, the team with everyone around them could not get it done. Here, in this year, they got it done. And yes, you can make the case of he's kind of standing back. But at the same time, though, you also look at the year before in 2021, and you say to yourself, well, Jalen Hurts needed full development because he simply could not get there. And you saw back in 2020, he did not have the arm. There was a lot of chatter that potentially he was not the guy. He did not have the arm strength to make it all the way downfield where he was. And that's also why they got A.J. Brown too, because you didn't have to throw all the way downfield for him because his yards, his yak, as we call it, his yards after catch is one of the best in the league. So you throw short passes if he doesn't have the arm strength to go downfield, and he just runs through these players. That's what A.J. Brown is known for when he was with Tennessee and drafted by them with Ryan Tannehill when he played there. But going back onto the defensive side of things, where you have so many different players, I believe that yes, he does have a point where he kind of had a free ride, but at the same time, though, you look back at 2011 and say, that's your prime example of we brought in any player and it did not work. Here it worked. It's a gamble. It's a humongous gamble to bring in these players. But now Howie Roseman, with nearly 13 years of experience, now comes in and does the exact same thing, maneuvers the cap, and brings in multiple Pro Bowl players, Pro Bowl caliber and all-pro players. Look at he brought in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and a first-round draft pick that's now number 10 overall, right? You re-sign Brandon Graham. You re-sign Fletcher Cox. You rip up those contracts. You make them brand new ones. Yeah, okay, you have the dead cap, but you make things work, and you already have that foundation built. Brandon Graham, oddly enough, countered with, quote, people always got something to say when they're sitting at home, end quote. He's not wrong. I get Julian Love, and you know what? I get the point. Is he wrong? I don't want to say that he is. I really believe that he's kind of right. But the difference, though, is that he doesn't have to do that much, Nick Sirianni, that is, because he's got so many players. But again, if the guys buy into the system that Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator, has given them, they'll do well. But then you can make the argument about 2011 where they didn't buy in at all. They were all over the place.
Well,
and one of the best cornerbacks in the league, Nnamdi Asomugha, was completely exposed and was showed for the fraud that he eventually was.
Well, that goes down to coaching too, getting guys to buy in. So, right. I mean, my point is just that the NFL is a coach's league. So that's what I counter Julian Love with, is that this is a coach's league. It's not a players' league. Look at the New York Giants themselves. Julian Love was on the team when it was Joe Judge coaching the team. Look, the New York Giants from this year to last year, you had Joe Judge and Brian Daboll as the head coaches, but there wasn't that crazy of a difference in terms of the player personnel. Obviously, there was some different wide receivers thanks to injuries and whatnot. You can cherry pick guys here and there, but in terms of the core nucleus of the team, wasn't a whole lot different. Yeah, Joe Judge didn't have the luxury of having an extremely healthy and 100% Saquon Barkley. But so much of this season for the Giants was down to, everybody talked about, this is a roster that has so many holes, and they not only got to the playoffs, but won a game. They got to the divisional round.
Yeah.
And everybody, I think, goes to how great of a coaching job this was by the Giants, Brian Daboll and company, to get a team with such a flawed roster, so many holes, to the playoffs and to win a game. So it is a coach's league when you look at the night and day difference that the Giants were from the last year of Joe Judge to this year with Brian Daboll. Going back to your Philly example, they had all those great players, whether it was the players didn't buy in themselves. Part of that is on the coaches and putting everybody in the right scheme. You had the players there. Why didn't it work out? And part of it has to go on to coaching. I just think so much in the NFL is driven by coaching. I think Sirianni's had it set up very well. I know Ian in our group chat brought up the Rex Ryan example where he walked into the Jets and a lot of the foundational pieces were there for him. And, he just had to coach up the team, and they made it to back-to-back AFC championship appearances, and then everything just fell off a cliff. But I think there still has to be some level of coaching, right? And I think the jump that Hurts's take should be a feather in Sirianni's cap that I think Julian Love didn't give him enough credit for. So it's a coach's league, not a player's league.
Definitely a fair assessment there by Mike Szabo. I like that. And especially too, we bring up the dream team issue because of, prime example, especially with the same team as well. Obviously, none of the players are there anymore. You still have because Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce were Fletcher Cox was actually drafted in 2012. Kelce was drafted in 2011, so he was on that team. And Brandon Graham was drafted, I believe, the year before in 2010. So he was there. Anyway. So, they know all about those potential comparisons, everything along those lines. Mike, let's keep on rolling here since we do have a few more minutes left here. And oddly enough, time has gone, of course, by, as always, nice and quick. But Toronto, we'll go to Major League Baseball now, and the Toronto Blue Jays and right-handed pitcher Chad Green agree on a 2-year deal, and it's worth about $8.5 million. Now, we know what happened to the Yankees bullpen last year after Michael King broke his elbow and eventually needed Tommy John surgery as well. Mike, granted, Chad Green has been a mainstay in the Yankees bullpen for a while. Now he jumped ship north of the border. Is this a big loss, or is this one that we could just brush off the shoulder?
I think we won't see the dividends of it for a while, because I think he's probably would come back later in the season, and then he has full another year of control after that.
Yeah.
I think I don't want to overstate, like, one bullpen pitcher is like is going to cause a team from, going to, from zero to hero, sort of the phrase, I guess. I think it's a big loss. I think for the Yankees, I don't think the bullpen is where I'm most concerned about. I think they have ample enough replacements and whatnot. I think the bullpen will be just fine. But for the Toronto Blue Jays, I think it's a really good pickup. It's going to take a while for you to see the dividends of it. Probably you'll have him back, hopefully, for the best time of the year in the late stretch, the home stretch of the regular season, and hopefully for them into the playoffs for their sake. This is the one part I think of the team that was holding the Toronto Blue Jays back is that the bullpen. Besides Jordan Romano, the bullpen options have just been all over the place and extreme inconsistency. I think with Chad Green, once he's finally healthy, you bring in a really solid and reliable major league bullpen piece that, God forbid, you have injuries befall you, can even we see it in a trend in Major League Baseball nowadays, and open a game, go multi innings and whatnot. I think turns into a really good weapon for this Toronto Blue Jays side. I think it's a pretty good pickup for them in a real position of need for that team.
So let's move into the National Hockey League, because obviously now in the New York area, there's a couple of, there's one big domino that fell out here on Long Island, and then there's another one that could be coming here to Manhattan. So let's start off with Long Island, because that deal was already complete. Vancouver, they traded their biggest trade chip and the number one rental on the market in the National Hockey League, Bo Horvat, their captain, to the New York Islanders for Anthony Beauvillier, Atu Ratu, the first round or second round draft pick, who a lot of folks before COVID had him potentially in the top 5 of their draft boards in 2020, and a conditional first round draft pick, top 12 protected. So, from what we've heard, Mike Szabo, from our good friend Rob DeLuca, who is a avid Devils fan and has pretty much grown up with Lou Lamoriello, knows that Lou Lamoriello does not trade players unless there is an extension. Either he feels it or it's already potentially in the works. Now, something that you had brought up, though, off camera before we started, Mike, I want you to just tell the viewers what you had said about with Bo Horvat too. What was it that we were talking about before?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty solid deal for the Islanders. I think we were talking about, I think trades Lamoriello has done much better with in terms of hitting sort of the top names in the market for the Islanders. You had a couple of years ago, you had Pajot come over. They've had much more success there than when it comes to free agency, I think, is what I was trying to get with in our conversation. So they've hit the big name guys on the trade front, but not exactly on the free agent front. I think the Horvat deal is pretty good. If you're probably an Islanders fan, I think you probably would have just rathered a player and a pick rather than the 2 players. I think Ratti giving him up kind of hurts, knowing that an extension is going to, that puts every team in the NHL, you have a little bit of salary cap problems and things to maneuver around, but you would have loved to, you have Ratti, or Ratu, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
Yeah, it's Atu Ratu. You're good.
Ratu. Probably would have liked to have him around. I think he had a pretty solid cameo the first couple of games that he had come up with the Islanders before, the break happened and this trade came in. Because you're going to extend Horvat, but unless, I think it would be an abject failure if they don't and he just walks in the summer. So it will put more strain on the cap and the Islanders' payroll going forward. So it would have been nice that you would have had a great guy like Ratu there, on a cheap entry-level contract. But I think it's a pretty solid deal overall. You knew you were going to have to give up a first-round pick for a talent like Horvat. Beauvillier, I don't think you lose sleep seeing him go. I think his play has dropped off a little bit in the last year or so compared to what it used to be. So I think it's a pretty solid deal for the Islanders that need to. in a loaded Metropolitan division that makes it seem like they're bad this year, they're right there in that he can hopefully give you the steroid shot to get back into a playoff spot.
Yeah, and a lot of guys too, Mike. A lot of teams wanted Bo Horvat, and there was a lot of chatter too that the Rangers were also in on him too. Which again, how can you do that when you are cap stricken as well? And something that you had brought up about the cap issues with the Islanders too. The positive there was that Anthony Beauvillier had 1 extra year of control next year. So that comes off the books. So now that removes $4.125 million off the books for 2023-24. So that kind of gives way for Bo Horvat to potentially sign that extension, as well as Varlamov coming off the books and a few others. So that was pretty good mathematics-wise. But also, again, something that is definitely, something to look at is where does Bo Horvat play? Because they have a plethora of centers. And I know the Rangers have always wanted centers. They've needed centers for so long. And that's also why, too, Bo Horvat's name was, was spoken about with the Rangers, because they need centers. Now the Islanders have about 5 starting centers. Well, who goes or who moves over? Now, there's a lot of talk that potentially Horvat could take over the number 1 center spot and move Barzal to the wing. So maybe things can work out there. We don't know, Islanders fans. We'll see what goes on there. But we move to Manhattan quickly, because now we are on a little bit of a time restraint. We've got about 10 minutes to get done with this and St. John's and Xavier. And then we'll conclude this with our kudos. But trade deadline, Mike, is 29 days away. And now, apparently, according to TSN's Frank Saravalli at dailyfaceoff.com, Saravalli, the Rangers are now the apparent frontrunners for Timo Meier from the Sharks. Now, that's a big deal. Why? Because he makes $6 million AAV now. He's a restricted free agent, arbitration eligible, but this is a biggie. He has a qualifying offer of $10 million. Where do you go from here, Mike, if you're the Rangers?
Stay away, please, stay away. Listen, the on the ice talent with Timo Meier is there. You want that talent. He's one of the best forwards in the NHL. Like, if the Rangers are starving for 5-on-5 goal scoring and whatnot, and you're never going to turn away a talent like that. But it just does not fit for the situation that they're in. I mean, we always talk about cap troubles. The Rangers are in absolute cap hell. The mathematics that they have to do these next couple of years, it just doesn't fit the mold of where their payroll is to acquire Meier financially. Just really doesn't make sense. The cost is going to be through the roof with him being a restricted free agent and whatnot. And how does it fit past this year? It just doesn't fit at all. Money-wise, you already have the core 4 of Panarin, Zibanejad, Trocheck, and Kreider that money-wise are not going anywhere, and some of them have no move clauses.
And those are untradeable contracts too.
Exactly. So that's all set in there. I think it doesn't make sense to take on Meier as a rental. You give up too much. It doesn't fit beyond this year. I think Drury just has to continue the approach that he did last year. Go out, you have the capital and whatnot. Go out and acquire guys on expiring contracts, less term, that can really help out the Rangers going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely see what happens there. And again, 29 days away is the trade deadline. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I know for a fact, Mike, next week and the week after too, we will be getting into that. We'll be having guests on from all around the NHL, because that's kind of our specialty here in the Primetime Rundown. We get those guests and we'll be talking about it and sharing our expertise as well. So be sure to keep an eye out on that, folks. One last thing here before we wrap it up, of course, and I know this one is awfully fast because there's not much to discuss here, Mike. St. John's. The St. John's Red Storm and the Xavier Musketeers go head-to-head tomorrow, 5 p.m. on Fox. It's a nationally televised game. St. John's opens as a 10-point underdog against Xavier. That is the opening line as per BetMGM, Caesars, and DraftKings. Looking back to St. John's, what they did against Seton Hall, 84-72, they lost on Wednesday night. Mike, you were there. I was there. We were both there together. St. John's had a 13-point lead blown. That is their that's another double-digit lead blown. Where do you go with this team?
There's not many plays. I really don't see this team going that far this year. Or I don't see a turnaround coming. It's just the same issues that continue to plague this team over and over. Whether it was, if they don't get off to a good start, sometimes they do get out to a good start. They get your double-digit lead, and then it just turns around, and they wind up blowing that lead, and they never truly recover, or they get into a close game that they always wind up on the wrong side of. So it always is the same issues plaguing them. They don't shoot well enough consistently. They don't play a complete 40 minutes, I think, is the simplest way to put it. Most simple way to explain their issues is that they just don't play a complete 40 minutes. They can play a good 5-10 minute spurt where the defense is great, the energy is high, they're knocking down the shots and whatnot. They're building that lead, and it looks like, wow, this team can really play, really compete and whatnot, and go out and win a couple of games. And then they just have those other periods of the game where their defensive lapses. They're absolutely cold shooting wise. The other team adjusts really well to how they're playing, and they're just not able to readjust themselves in order to go out and win the game. Again, 84 points given up. This is year 4 of Mike Anderson, and what is the identity of this team? What exactly do they do well, more so than any other team? What exactly is their specialty? I think you're hard-pressed to really find that one thing that they do expertly well. They don't shoot from the 3 well. Going back to 84 points given up. They don't really defend well. Look, a couple weeks earlier against Marquette last month, gave up 96 points in Carnesecca Arena to set a school record. Yeah. Gave up over 100 points to Creighton on the road. This is year 4 of Mike Anderson, and his profile as the foundation was always a defensive coach, the 40 minutes of hell press sort of defense and whatnot. And they're not defending well. That foundation is not even there itself in year 4 of his tenure. So it's a team without identity that just absolutely lacks consistency, and it showed up again against Seton Hall. Shaheen Holloway pressed the right buttons at the right time, and the team they had their ups and downs offensively in the game. I think early on they got off to a rough start, but again he pushed the right buttons when they needed to. They started making threes in the second half and just did what they needed to do, made the necessary adjustments that they needed to win that game.
Unbelievable stuff. And you know what? It's funny because the second time that Seton Hall has scored 80 points in conference play, and they're both against St. John's. Yeah. For Xavier, they are without Zach Fremantle for the next month. It's a crucial loss. We'll see if St. John's can attack the middle and the paint and potentially just feed it to Joel Soriano. Does it happen? Does anyone listen to me? Probably not. I'm going to say probably not, Mike Szabo, because it's very, very simple. Just like when Seton Hall had 4 players with 4 fouls. 4 players, 4 fouls for 11 minutes, and the first player to get fouled out was Tyrese Samuel with 2 minutes to go. I'll leave it at that. Mike, let's get to our kudos here. Mike, you go first.
Well, this week I know we're celebrating National Girls and Women's in Sports Day. So just a shout out to all the female athletes out there in collegiate athletics, all the behind the scenes female staff that help all the teams run. Shout out to all of them, everything they do in college operations to help all the athletes shine and do their thing.
Amen. Absolutely. And my kudos goes to former assistant head coach in Detroit, Deuce Staley, former running backs coach and assistant head coach in Philadelphia. He's now with Frank Reich in Carolina. His role in Carolina is still to be determined, but we'll have to wait and see in the next few weeks or in the next few days or probably after the Super Bowl when the official press conference and press release comes out there. So my kudos goes to former Eagles running back Deuce Staley. So that is our show, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, or rather start off with, of course, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Odyssey. And of course, if you'd like to see our beautiful faces, please search on YouTube, The Eastern Observer. And the same thing goes for our friends at the Essential Wrestling Podcast, who are on a current hiatus. Still, nonetheless, please take a peek at some of their archives: Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and The Eastern Observer, if you'd like to see their beautiful faces. Ladies and gentlemen, one final time, Mike Szabo, our friend Ian Schraier, who is on assignment tonight, Joey Jarzynka saying so long from everyone here at the Blackjack Media Group. We will see you all next Friday night, beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for episode 108 right here on the Eastern Observer. So long.